The year was 1977. London was a city of contrasts, where the old world met the new, and the streets were alive with the hustle and bustle of everyday life. Yet, amidst the vibrant energy of the city, there was a place where an eerie silence prevailed, a place that would soon become infamous for its supernatural occurrences. A cold dread settled upon 284 Green Street. This house, with its unremarkable facade, hid a dark secret that would soon come to light. The air around it seemed to thicken with an unseen force, a palpable tension that could be felt by anyone who dared to approach. This unassuming house in Enfield, England, became a battleground between the known and the unknown. It was here that the boundaries between reality and the supernatural blurred, and the ordinary became extraordinary. The house stood as a silent witness to the events that would unfold, its walls holding the secrets of the past and the horrors of the present. It was a place where darkness seeped into reality, shadows moved of their own accord, and the very fabric of the house seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy. The nights were filled with strange noises, whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, and an overwhelming sense of dread that hung in the air like a thick fog, where an unseen entity made its presence known. This entity, whatever it was, seemed to feed on fear, growing stronger with each passing day. It was a force that could not be seen, but its presence was felt in every corner of the house. Objects moved on their own, doors slammed shut without warning, and a chilling coldness pervaded the rooms. This is the story of the Enfield Poltergeist, a tale that has fascinated and terrified people for decades. It is a story of a family caught in the grip of a malevolent force, and the lengths they went to in order to survive. It is a story that has been told and retold, each time adding to the legend of the Enfield Poltergeist. The Hodson family, ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances, lived at 284 Green Street. They were a typical suburban family, living a quiet life in a quiet neighborhood. But their lives would be forever changed by the events that took place within the walls of their home. Peggy Hodson, a single mother, faced an evil she could never have imagined. She was a strong woman, doing her best to raise her children on her own, but nothing could have prepared her for the terror that would soon invade her home. She would find herself in a battle against an unseen enemy, fighting to protect her family from a force that seemed determined to destroy them. Her children, Margaret, Janet, Philip, and Johnny, would become the targets of a terrifying haunting. They were just kids, trying to live their lives and go to school like any other children. But the events that took place in their home would leave them scarred for life. They would experience things that no child should ever have to endure, and their innocence would be shattered by the horrors they witnessed. Their normal lives were about to be shattered. The Hodson family would find themselves at the center of a media frenzy as news of the haunting spread. Reporters, investigators, and curious onlookers would descend upon their home, all wanting to catch a glimpse of the supernatural. But for the Hodgsons, this was not a story to be told. It was a nightmare to be lived. The Enfield Poltergeist was ready to unleash its rage. The events that took place at 284 Green Street would go down in history as one of the most documented and terrifying hauntings of all time. The Hodson family would be forever changed by the experience, and the legend of the Enfield Poltergeist would continue to haunt the imaginations of people around the world. The nightmare began subtly, strange noises, unexplained movements. The Hodson family dismissed them at first. Just an old house settling, they thought. But the phenomena escalated. One August night, the impossible happened. Furniture moved on its own, violently crashing against walls. Peggy rushed to her children's aid, only to witness the unexplainable. Her children were seemingly being tossed around by an unseen force. Fear gripped their hearts. This was no ordinary haunting. This was something far more sinister. The Hodson family was now trapped in a nightmare. Word of the Enfield haunting spread like wildfire. It wasn't long before the story reached the ears of those who dedicated their lives to uncovering the mysteries of the paranormal. The small, unassuming house at 284 Green Street had become the epicenter of a phenomenon that would soon captivate the world. Paranormal investigators Maurice Grosse and Guy Lyon Playfair arrived at 284 Green Street. They were seasoned professionals, having spent years delving into the unknown. Their arrival marked a turning point in the investigation. bringing with them a sense of both skepticism and hope. Initially, Gross and Playfair approached the case with a healthy dose of skepticism. They had seen many supposed hauntings turn out to be hoaxes or misunderstandings. However, as they began to gather evidence, their doubts started to wane. The sheer volume and intensity of the phenomena they witnessed were unlike anything they had encountered before. Objects flew across rooms, seemingly propelled by an unseen hand. Chairs would slide across the floor, and toys would levitate and then crash to the ground. These events were not isolated incidents but occurred with alarming frequency, often in the presence of multiple witnesses. Gross and Playfair documented every chilling detail with meticulous care. They set up cameras and audio recorders, hoping to capture definitive proof of the paranormal activity. Their recordings would later become some of the most compelling evidence in the case. They recorded disembodied voices, some guttural and menacing, others were eerily childlike. These voices would often speak directly to the investigators, sometimes providing information that seemed impossible for anyone in the house to know. The voices added a deeply unsettling layer to the already disturbing events. The investigators were convinced this was a genuine haunting, and it seemed to center around young Janet Hodson. Janet, a seemingly ordinary girl, became the focal point of the activity. She would often be found at the center of the most intense phenomena, leading Gross and Playfair to believe that she was somehow connected to the entity. She would become the focal point of the Enfield Poltergeist's wrath. The entity seemed to have a particular interest in her, often targeting her with its most violent outbursts. Janet's experiences would become some of the most documented and analyzed aspects of the case, providing a wealth of information for both skeptics and believers alike. On several occasions, Janet was reportedly seen levitating above her bed, her body contorted in unnatural positions. These events were witnessed by multiple people, including family members, neighbors, and even police officers. The levitations were among the most dramatic and convincing pieces of evidence that Gross and Playfair collected. The house itself seemed to take on a life of its own. At night, strange noises would echo through the halls, and cold spots would appear in various rooms. The atmosphere was thick with a sense of dread, making it clear to anyone who entered that something was very wrong. In interviews, Gross and Playfair would often speak about the emotional toll the investigation took on them. They were not just dealing with unexplained phenomena, but also with a family in distress. The Hodgsons were living in constant fear, and it was the investigators' job to provide both answers and comfort. As the investigation progressed, media coverage of the Enfield Poltergeist grew. Newspapers and television programs began to report on the strange happenings at 284 Green Street, bringing the story to an even wider audience. The public was fascinated, and the case quickly became one of the most famous hauntings in history. The legacy of the Enfield Poltergeist continues to this day. It remains one of the most well-documented and debated cases in the annals of paranormal research. For Gross and Playfair, it was a career-defining investigation, one that would leave an indelible mark on their lives and on the field of paranormal studies. One of the most unsettling aspects of the Enfield case was the voice. It wasn't just any voice. It was a voice that seemed to come from the depths of another world, a voice that carried with it an air of malevolence and despair. This voice, which spoke through young Janet Hodson, was unlike anything the investigators had ever encountered before. It spoke through Janet, twisting her young voice into something grotesque and chilling. The transformation was so profound that it was hard to believe it was coming from a young girl. Her voice, normally sweet and innocent, became a conduit for something dark and sinister. The entity that spoke through her seemed to relish in the fear it caused, each word dripping with malice. The entity identified itself as Bill Wilkins, an old man who claimed to have died in the house. This revelation added a layer of complexity to the case, as the investigators now had to contend with the possibility that they were dealing with a spirit who had a history and a story of his own. Bill's voice was not just a random occurrence, it was a direct link to the house's dark past. Recordings of Bill's voice sent shivers down spines. These recordings were played over and over, each time eliciting the same reaction of fear and unease. The voice was so clear, so filled with emotion, that it was impossible to dismiss it as a mere trick or fabrication. It was as if Bill Wilkins was reaching out from beyond the grave, making his presence known in the most terrifying way possible. His raspy pronouncements, filled with malice and rage, were bone-chilling. Each word he spoke seemed to carry a weight of anger and resentment, as if he was lashing out at the living for the injustices he had suffered in life. The investigators could feel the intensity of his emotions, and it left them shaken and disturbed. He taunted the investigators, threatened the family, and reveled in the chaos he created. Bill's voice was not just a passive presence. It was an active force that sought to dominate and control. He seemed to take pleasure in the fear he caused, using his voice as a weapon to manipulate and terrorize those around him. The voice was undeniable evidence of a haunting, but its true nature remained a mystery. Despite the numerous recordings and the clear presence of Bill Wilkins, the investigators were left with more questions than answers. What was the true nature of this entity? Was it really the spirit of Bill Wilkins, or was it something more sinister, using his identity as a guise? The voice, with all its chilling pronouncements, remained an enigma, a dark puzzle that haunted the minds of those who heard it. The investigators spent countless hours analyzing the voice recordings, trying to find any clues that could explain the phenomenon. They looked for patterns, inconsistencies, anything that could provide a rational explanation. But the more they listened, the more they were convinced that they were dealing with something beyond the realm of the normal. They delved into the history of the house and the life of Bill Wilkins, searching for any connections that could shed light on the haunting. They found records of his life, his death, and his time in the house, but nothing that could fully explain the malevolent presence that now seemed to inhabit it. The family, meanwhile, was living in a state of constant fear. They recounted their experiences with the voice, each story more harrowing than the last. The voice would come at all hours, disrupting their lives and filling their home with a sense of dread. It was a relentless presence, one that they could not escape. Paranormal experts were brought in to offer their theories, but even they were baffled by the case. Some suggested that the voice was a manifestation of Janet's subconscious, a way for her to express repressed emotions. Others believed it was a genuine spirit, a lost soul trapped in the house. But no matter the theory, the voice remained a chilling reminder of the unknown forces that can sometimes intrude into our world. In the end, the voice of Bill Wilkins became one of the most compelling pieces of evidence in the Enfield case. It was a voice that defied explanation, a voice that brought the darkness of the past into the present. And as the investigators and the family continued to grapple with its presence, they were left with the haunting realization that some mysteries are never meant to be solved.